In this, the Halloween edition of the House of Lechmere, we are in the most important cemetery so far as Jack the Ripper is concerned in all of London. And it is Tower Hamlets Cemetery, a few hundred yards behind Marlet Tube Station. I think tonight I've got the entire cemetery all to myself. Now, I'm going to show you some very interesting graves. Some of them are covered in previous episodes, but not like this, not at dark, not at night, when we've just got these eerie shadows around us. Now I'm going to show you these graves and tell you the story about them. This is the most well-known Jack the Ripper related grave in this cemetery. It is for Ralph Llewellyn, the doctor who examined the first canonical victim of Jack the Ripper, Polly Nichols, at Bucks Row on the 31st of August 1888. And in many ways, with Ralph Llewellyn, this is where the story starts. Now, Llewellyn said that when he examined Polly, he felt she had been dead for less than 30 minutes. Now, medical opinion on such matters at that time was not an exact science, but it is nevertheless the best estimate we have. So what happened? What was happening just under 30 minutes before Ralph Llewellyn got to Bucks Row, to Brown Stable Yard, where Polly's body was lying? Let's start. Go back to the first person who was on the scene, who we know as being on the scene. It was a witness, a so-called witness, called Charles Cross. Of course, he was really called Charles Allen Lechmere. He was seen standing very close to the body on Bucks Row by another witness called Robert Paul. We'll start there. Look, Lechmere sees Paul. Paul sees Lechmere. They go towards each other. Lechmere tells Paul that there's a body over there. They go up to the body. They touch it. They both touch the body to see if she's cold or breathing. Paul touches her breast, thinks she's still alive. He suggests they prop her up. Lechmere says he doesn't want to touch her. Paul then, to make her decent, pulls her dress down. It's a bit caught up. It was up to her waist. Pulls it down to her knees. Then he says, "Oh, I'm late for work. I don't want to hang around." Lechmere says likewise. They leave. They claim they're going to find the first policeman that they see. They walk past the first policeman they could have reported it to, PC 81 of the GER, a railway policeman, about 60 yards perhaps away, up down Bucks Row on the right hand side. They walk past him. They ignore him. They carry on. They pass Thomas Street, down Bucks Row, heading westwards towards the city. They reach the end of the road, they turn right, and eventually they bump into PC Misen. Meanwhile, PC Neil, after they've gone past, PC Neil turns into Thomas Street. He turns down Bucks Row. He goes back the way they've come from. They're heading west, he's heading east, back towards Polly Nichols' dead body. He eventually reaches Polly Nichols' body. He sees a body there. He gets his lantern out. He looks at it closely. He sees blood oozing out of her throat. He then hears, at 140 yards away, at the end of Bucks Row, at the other end of Bucks Row, he hears PC Thane on his beat. He signals him with his lantern. PC Thane comes to PC Neil. PC Neil sends him for the doctor, Dr Llewellyn. PC Thane goes to get Dr Llewellyn, perhaps or perhaps not, picking up his cape on the way at the Harrison Barber horse slaughter yard. But PC Thane goes to get Dr Llewellyn. He gets to Dr Llewellyn. The times aren't that important, but Dr Llewellyn said it was just before 4 o'clock. Dr Llewellyn is roused from his slumbers. He dresses. He goes back out with PC Thane. He gets to the crime scene, Brown Stable Yard, where Polly's body is. That's when we stop the stopwatch. That's going to be about half an hour. That puts Lechmere right in the frame straight away. It's not absolutely compelling evidence because there is flexibility in these timings. If there wasn't flexibility and if it was half an hour, that would convict Lechmere straight away. But it is nevertheless good evidence that Lechmere has to be the number one suspect straight away, just on that one bit of evidence straight away that Dr Llewellyn provided. Next I'm going to show you the grave of Rose Mylett. She's in the Whitechapel murder files, but she was murdered in Poplar, and many people don't regard her as a Whitechapel murder victim. I think she may well have been, and we should certainly not discount her. It's just in here. She was buried roughly here. Now I'm going to credit a researcher called Jose Oranto. I might have got his name wrong. I'm getting a lot of stick lately for getting names wrong. Tracy Ianson, who wrote the book on Jacob Levy. I mispronounced her name, and I also mispronounced Hallie Rubenhold's name. I apologise for mispronouncing people's names. We're not all perfect. Anyway, Jose Oranto, he found, I first identified that this is a spot. Now, what is the significance of Rose Mylett? She died on the 20th of December 1888, a month and a bit after Mary Kelly was murdered, the last of the so-called canonical five. She was found dead in a place called Clark's Yard, a yard off Poplar High Street. The local examining doctors all felt that she'd been strangled and murdered. The inquest found that she'd been murdered, but Sir Robert Anderson, the head of the Criminal Investigation Department at Scotland Yard, didn't think for his own reason. He wasn't a trained doctor, he wasn't even actually a trained policeman, believed for his own reasons that it wasn't murder, and he sent his own doctor down to get a different opinion. The coroner was quite annoyed about this interference. Now, why do I think Anderson didn't want it to be a murder? His boss, Sir Charles Warren, had about immediately after the Mary Kelly murder, he'd resigned from being Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police due to pressure associated with the Jet Ripper murders. And I think Anderson didn't want any more murders, didn't want the Metropolitan Police to have its reputation sullied even further for incompetence, so he didn't want it to be a murder. Anyway, what is the other significance of the Rose Mylett murder? Well, on one side of Clark's Yard, on Poplar High Street, was a Pickford's office. On the other side, a little bit further away, was a great big Pickford's depot at Poplar railway station. That depot and that railway line led straight to Broad Street, where there was another Pickford's depot where Charles Lechmere worked for Pickford's. And that is the significance of the Rose Mylett murder. Now, I've done other films, as I said, about Tower Hamlets Cemetery, and I'll provide links where I go into greater detail about Rose Mylett in these other films. I'll have links below for all these other films. I've already mentioned Charles Lechmere on both of the previous graves. Now, this is the grave of his wife, Elizabethlechmere. She was originally Bostock. She died in September 1940. Now, the interesting thing about her is she's buried at this end of the cemetery. He's buried way down at the very furthest end of the cemetery. He died in 1920, as we'll see later on. But she's buried at the opposite end of the cemetery. The other interesting thing about her is that she has a surviving great-grandson who would have known her. He would have been 8 when she died. And other great-grandchildren who I met, and who other people living met and knew, and her grandchild's wives, they're all living in recent memory. None of them knew the name Cross. None of them knew the fact that Charles Lechmere had been involved in the Jet Ripper murders. That is a very interesting fact. The Ripper murders were not that long ago in some respects. 1940, the wife of Charles Lechmere died. And now we've got the victims of the Bethnal Green Tube Disaster of the 3rd of March 1943, when 173 people were crushed to death on the steps of Bethnal Green Tube Station. And this involved 3 members of the Lechmere family, one of Charles Lechmere's sons, his wife, and one of his grandsons. And the grave is over here. So we've got here Thomas Lechmere, that was his son, who took over his the cat's meat business of his grandmother, who we call old Marlechmere. Then we have his wife Florence. Then we have his son, Charles Lechmere's grandson, Thomas Lechmere, who also ran the cat's meat business and won bravery medals in the First World War, and whose wife May only died in 1990, and who I actually met. The interesting thing is the cat's meat business that they ran, that these people ran, continued until 1943 in Broadway Market in Hackney, and the business, the market stall business, ran until the 1980s. After they died in the Bethnal Green Tube Disaster, the business continued on the market, but selling fruit and veg from then onwards. Now actually, the graves, they look quite neat and tidy. A number of years ago, they were all higgledy-piggledy. Half of them were fallen on the floor. This one is the Lechmere grave, and actually this victim here is in the same grave, so this stone should actually really be aligned with this stone. But as I said, they've all got mixed up over the years. Now interestingly, the Lechmere one is in the right place, and it's 4809. At grave 4806, which would have been just over here, two of the witness called George Hutchinson, two of his grandchildren were buried there. They have no marker though. It was Joan Hutchinson, aged just 10, and William Hutchinson, aged just 6. Both tragically died in the Bethnal Green Tube Disaster and are buried just about there. I will do a future episode on the witness, and to some people suspect George Hutchinson, because it is a very interesting story. Now some people dispute that these were his grandchildren, think there's another George Hutchinson's grandchildren, but in this other episode, which I'll do it sometime in the near future, I'll go into all that. It's indisputable in my opinion that this was the George Hutchinson's grandchildren. On the 13th of February 1891, Frances Coles was murdered in Swallow Gardens, quite near the Tower of London, in the East End. She is the last of the Whitechapel murder victims. The first person on the scene when she was murdered was PC Ernest Thompson. It was the first time, he was a very fresh new policeman, it was the first time he'd gone out on the beat on his own, and he came across her body. Her eyes were flickering, and he knew she'd been attacked and stabbed, but he heard footsteps going off in the distance. But because he saw signs of life, police regulations said he couldn't leave the body. That is possibly one of the opportunities for him to run after and caught Jack the Ripper or the Whitechapel murderer, or at least the murderer of Frances Coles, but he couldn't. Now on the 1st of December 1900, PC Ernest Thompson was murdered in the course of his duty on Union Street. It's now called Adler Street, just off Commercial Road in the East End, not a million miles away from where Frances Coles was murdered. And he was murdered in the line of duty. He was stabbed to death. And his grave is around here. I'll confess, this is the one grave on this tour that has eluded me. I've been there before, but in the dark, I know it's around here somewhere. It's very difficult grave to find in daylight, let alone at night time. And they've removed a fence. There used to be a fence over there that used to guide me to it, and they've removed it. The cemetery authorities have removed it. So Ernest Thompson's grave with two other policemen, it was a police grave, is one of these ones around here, but I just can't find it today, I'm afraid. I've been beaten by Ernest Thompson's grave. We'll go on to the next one. So here we are, back to find Ernest Thompson's grave. I wasn't going to be defeated. Now I'll show you a clip of the last time I was here, and when I was here in daylight, and there used to be a metal fence down here, and that's what confused me. And this is the route you have to take to find Ernest Thompson's grave. So I've been searching through this little area for about half an hour, and eventually I found PC Thompson's grave right here, and that was something of a mission, I can tell you. PC Ernest Thompson's grave with 2 other policemen. Virtually all the lettering is now gone. Now we're at the grave of the world famous Charles Jamrach, who had a wild animal emporium on the highway. Now the road's called the highway now. It was called the Ratcliffe Highway, St George's Highway, but now it's just called the highway. And we'll go and have a close look at his inscription. He supplied animals to people all through the country, and they came in through the docks, exotic animals from around the world. So can you pick this out? We've got Charles Jamrach, who died in September 1891, age 76. He lived in Bow when he died in East London. He was actually born in 1815 in Hamburg, and as I said, he supplied animals to people throughout the world. Interestingly, in 1891, when he died, opposite him, opposite his shop on the highway, Charles Lechmere's mother had a cat's meat business, almost directly opposite Charles Jamrach's shop. She'd opened it up a couple of years earlier. They quite probably knew each other. The other interesting thing about Jamrach, one of the things that he's most well known for, is that in July 1859, a tiger escaped from its cage in his warehouse, which is on a place. He had a warehouse in a place called Bett Street, which is just off the highway, and this tiger that had been imported from the Far East somewhere managed to escape from his cage, ran down the highway and grabbed by his neck, by his scruff of his neck, a young boy who was walking down the road. The boy was called John Wade. Now, Jamrach came running out of his emporium, smashed the tiger over his head, grabbed him by the scruff of the neck, rescued the boy, behaved very bravely, and all was well. The boy wasn't really harmed. He was taken to London Hospital, but he wasn't really harmed. But nevertheless, his parents sued Jamrach, and Jamrach had to pay him 300 quid, which is a lot of money in those days, for damages. Now, the interesting thing is that John Wade, this boy, in 1859, who lived just around the corner, just off the highway, was exactly the same age as Charles Lechmere at the time. Young Charles Lechmere. They may well have been school buddies, because Charles Lechmere lived very close to there as well, lived very close to this location. And later, in 1888, when just before Charles Lechmere moved from his house near where his mother lived, in St George's in the east, up to Doveton Street, which is where he lived when the Jack the Ripper murders took place, 2 streets away, John Wade was living. They almost certainly knew each other. They're virtually the same age. They'd lived all their life within a couple of streets of each other. They almost certainly knew each other. And I've often speculated whether the Jamrach's tiger incident had any influence in shaping Lechmere's mind, the ferocity of that very famous incident. Now this is the grave of George Lusk, the chairman of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. I always cover it over with leaves so no one will abuse it, basically. So every time I go, I look at it, I clear the leaves off, and I always cover it back over again. So I can see straight away. He died in 1919. His wife, Susanna Lusk, had predeceased him. She died earlier in 1888, which is quite interesting. Her original name was Price, which you can hopefully see there. This is the Price family grave, really, which that's her, and this is the grave that he was put in as well. The stone has fallen, it should have been upright. So I'm going to put some water on it so you can see it clearer. Bit of product placement. We always need extra endorsement money. Ka-ching. Anyway, so here we go. I'll do this, bit of squirt. There's the word Lusk. If you come in close, come in very close, can you see the word Lusk here? So So can you see the word Lusk here? It's actually for Susanna Lusk, if the camera comes over. This is Susanna Lusk, that's Lusk's wife, and it's said it's the family name, it's the family grave of, can you read that? Price there, we're coming close. In October 1888, famously, George Lusk received a letter. It's called the From Hell letter, and included with the letter was half a kidney. This was just after the vicious murder of Catherine Eddowes on the 30th September, part of the double event. Elizabeth Strider had been murdered earlier that day, and Catherine Eddowes had part of her kidney removed. And this letter and kidney went through Lusk's letterbox at his house on Tollet Street. The letter famously said, "From hell, Mr. Lusk, sir, I send you half the kidney. I took it from one woman, preserved it for you. T'other piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I might send you the bloody knife that took it out, if only you wait a while longer. Signed, catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk." Now we're in this obliterated area of the cemetery. All the gravestones have been removed in the mid-60s, and this is where, in this general location here, is where Charles Lechmere's mother was buried on the 29th of December 1902, aged 77. His mother is known to people now affectionately as Old Ma Lechmere. She is buried very close to her son, just over there. As we will see in a moment, they're probably the two closest Lechmere graves in this entire cemetery. Up to the end, she was a cat's meat dealer. She even appeared in the trade directory of 1903 after she died as a cat's meat dealer, because she'd have put the advertisement in beforehand, not knowing, of course, that she was going to die. Now, it's my belief that Old Ma Lechmere had a very important role to play in Charles Lechmere's life. Not naturally, she was his mother. She was effectively his only son, because his older sister had died many years before, in the 1860s, and she looked after and raised one of Lechmere's daughters. And he'd spent nearly all his life living very close to her in the area of the East End, called St George's in the East. It's only when he moved away to Doverton Street, a couple of miles from his previous stamping ground at St George's in the East, that the Jack the Ripper murders started.
I'm a man who walks alone.
And now we come to the grave of Charles Allen Lechmere, the most likely culprit discovered so far to be that serial killer known to history as Jack the Ripper. He was buried around here. He died on the 23rd of December 1920, and he was laid to rest here on the 31st of December 1920. And that concludes this trip to Tower Hamlets Cemetery for Halloween. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe, share, like and comment below. Thank you very much.
Charlie.